Here we are. Hello, Glyn. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. Where are you at the moment?
Well, hello, everybody. Great to see you. At least those I can see there. I just say if you've got your screen switched off, it is a huge blessing to speakers to actually see people. And if you felt you're able to switch it on, you may be in the bath and that's not possible, and understand that. But if you're merely doing your knitting like Jane Simpson is there, I can say that it's a real blessing to see somebody knitting. In fact, I met my wife at university, or my wife to be at university, when I looked across the lecture theatre, because I'd heard the sound of knitting, and it made me feel all kind of cozy and homely. And I looked over, and then I noticed that the girl I saw, I'd also seen somewhere else at a Christian gathering. So I made sure I said hello, and the rest, as they say, Andy, is history. Anyway, great to be with you guys, knitting or not. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you. Glyn, I'd love to hear a little bit about your professional career. You're retired now, but what have you been doing for sort of the bulk of your career?
Yeah, well, as you can see, I am ancient, and I've actually been retired for quite a few years now, of course. But I graduated in medicine from Scotland, up in Scotland, a long time ago, 1974. And did my house jobs, and then actually specialized in psychiatry, and initially was a clinical psychiatrist, and then eventually became an academic psychiatrist, because much of my interest had veered over to the research and teaching side, although I kept a clinical practice, of course, right up until the end. That's an important part of keeping alive and engaged with what you're researching. But I eventually became professor of psychiatry, first in Nottingham and then in Bristol University, where I was until I retired, Andy. And then, that's it in a nutshell, really.
And I read somewhere that at one point you were advising the World Health Organization. What was that about?
Well, they take on people, temporary advisors, and I was a temporary advisor on schizophrenia research for a while with them. And in fact, that involved some big international studies we did as part of WHO at the time. We were studying the outcomes of severe psychotic illnesses like schizophrenia in different countries to see how they varied. And that was great fun. A lot of trips to Geneva, and a lot of trips to Hong Kong and Brazil. And, it was a lot of fun meeting patients actually in different settings, seeing the different kinds of treatment settings that were available. So, yeah.
So how have you kept yourself busy since you retired? Was it you retired a few years back?
10 years ago.
10
now,
years
I'm afraid
ago.
to say, yeah, I'm that old. But many academics actually, when they retire, step down and but carry on. They carry on speaking at various events, and I really wanted. I loved my career, but I really wanted to love now not having that career and doing something different. And so being able to retire at that point, I did actually step down from my research work. I was president of one of these international, associations, and I stepped down from that. And people were very puzzled, but I've always, obviously, faith has been a big part of my life, Andy, and I'd always wanted to do more work around the interface between faith and mental health, but also I've interested in church things. I got very involved in General Synod in the Church of England and various appointment committees. And I guess one of the things I've really enjoyed over the past few years is mentoring. I do a lot of mentoring of young psychiatrists, but also of pastors, clergy. And one of the things I'm pretty boundaried about is I don't see people anymore with mental health problems. So I know I often get long emails, can you help, or and I have to, it's always slightly saddens me actually, but I have to write back and say, obviously I can't give a bit of advice can be a lot worse than no advice in the complex this is. So I don't do that anymore, but it's been a huge privilege to use some of that experience in mental health to walk with people they're not mentally ill, but they're struggling, and to be able to walk with someone who's older. And a lot of the time I spend saying, well, yeah, here's how I got it wrong. Here's my story. So it's not me offering pearls of wisdom from on high or tablets of stone. It is the opportunity to share out of my heart and see someone who's earlier in either a pastoral ministry or a mental health career, able to hopefully benefit from that interaction. So that's been a great part of the last 10 years as well, Andy.
So you're clearly a man of great learning, great man of science, but some people might be intrigued then, or why is it that you're a Christian? How is it that you came to put your faith in Christ?
Well, I've been a follower of Christ as long as I can remember. Really, I grew up, and growing up to follow Jesus was just part of the way our family operated. And like everybody, there comes a point where you have to say, well, that's what they believe, but what do I really believe? That's what they told me to do or encouraged me to do, but now I've got the freedom. What am I going to do? Now, for some, that's a kind of a hard decision. For me, once again, it was something that I think emerged, that authenticity of commitment. This is me making this commitment. I can't put my finger on a particular date or time, but it was through my teenage years, certainly, that faith became much more, authentic from my own heart, as opposed to part of my family. And I've always, I think I've been captivated by two aspects of being a Christian, by the rational arguments for the Christian faith, which I think are credible, that things aren't sewn up, as we all know. We haven't got all the arguments sorted. Faith is involved. At the end of the day, we look at all the arguments in the round, and then we make our commitments in life, and we do that in lots of areas. But I'm persuaded when I look at the rationality of the Christian faith, the reasonableness of it. But of course, another side to the Christian faith is the non-rational aspects of the Christian faith, our religious experience, our encounter with God. And for me, that sense of being connected with the creator of the world, who reaches down and touches my life, that's also an important part of my lived experience as a Christian, and that's been formative, and critically important as well. So it's a kind of a roundabout answer to a specific question, but that's been part of my journey, Andy.
Well, Glyn, thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to you, and then after that we'll have a bit of Q&A. But thank you.
Thank you. Great to be with everybody again. What we're going to do is I'm going to talk for about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll break for some Q&A, and that's how we'll make the evening happen. What I'd like to do is, first of all, just not lose my little buttons here, which I've lost. I have to confess I get a little bit, let's just put that back again. Boom, boom, boom. There it is. Okay, sorry. Right, so what I'd like to do is start with a Bible reading, and if you're the kind of person who has a Bible to hand, you may want to look it up. If not, well, I'm just going to read it now, and it's just a few verses, but it's John chapter 10. These are very well-known words of Jesus, and can I just say, if you're kind of just looking in tonight, and you're not a Christian, not a person of faith. It's great, and I hope have the chance to interact a bit later on. But yeah, I'd love to just share some words here from the Christian Bible, and it's John chapter 10, and it's reading from verse 7 through to verse 11. Okay. So therefore Jesus said again, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Okay. Well, of course, and I was hoping that Andy or Johnny might actually say something about the title. So I would say that the title you've got there isn't the one I've been working to that I thought was going to be the title tonight. Slightly different title, and here it is: Mental Health: How Christianity is Good for Us. Okay, that's the title for tonight. I think you've got something like, is it harmful? And that's quite a different question and needs a different kind of answer. So I just want to make that clear. And nothing's off limits in the question, so by all means bring stuff up. But our title for tonight is Mental Health: How Christianity is Good for Us. And of course, that title does beg the question of whether Christianity is good for us at all. And that is an important question for two reasons. First, because some people argue that not only is Christianity not especially good for us, but that, like other religions, in the long run, it does do more harm than good. I mean, believing delusions, they say, that can never be good for you. Pie in the sky, when you die, it simply infantilizes people by telling them they can avoid facing up to the world as it is. That's a neurosis, they say, an escape from reality. And what about Revelations too, talking about harm, about respected Christian leaders who've fed off their followers and made the church into a vehicle for their self-aggrandizement and for abuse, worse, and oppression. No, Christianity, more harm than good. But then I said two reasons. Second, it's an important question. Is Christianity good for us? How is it good for us? Because the Christian faith itself claims to do us good. You know, we just read together, I am the gate. Whoever enters, Jesus said, through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. Now, there again, he's building an image in his hearers' pastoral lives. These were ordinary people in the countryside, and he's drawing on their experience, and they'll find pasture. And the thief comes only to destroy and kill and destroy, only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come, Jesus said, verse 10, that they may have life and have it to the full. Now, what's Jesus saying here? He's saying that the Christian faith isn't only about being saved from something, the wrongdoing that separates us from God, it's about being saved to something, to life, and not just life, but life in all its fullness. Again, big words. It's a big claim. Jesus is saying that all that brings joy to the human heart, goodness, beauty, truth, all of those things will flourish to their fullest extent in the life of the believer. there's a sense here of our being brought back into harmony with our true purpose, being restored to our true humanity. That's what Jesus is claiming here. So both of these factors sharpen this question: is Christian faith good for us? And if it is, how? And obviously, it's a big topic. We can't address all of this in the few minutes we have now, especially that question of how people have used faith to harm others. But let's do the best with the time that we have. And in the time we do have, I want to break this down into two halves. First, what does the evidence actually say about the relationship between having a faith and people's general well-being and what we know about their risk of mental illness? Are there data out there that points to that? And then second, supposing that data were to show a positive relationship, that the data suggests there may indeed be a positive effect between faith on the one hand and well-being on the other, how might that effect be mediated? In other words, what is it about faith itself that brings those benefits? Okay, so first, are there studies out there that tell us something about faith and mental health? Well, let's take studies of well-being first of all. Now, well-being is a tricky subject, as some of you may know. It's heavily contested, not least in what it means actually. What is well-being, and how do we measure it? And there's a lot of to and froing about that, but the most widely used measure is a relatively simple one. It's simply a question that asks people to rate their subjective sense of well-being or life satisfaction. That's another way of doing it, on a 5-point scale. And you just tell people just score yourselves on your subjective sense of well-being on that scale. And surprisingly, these simple measures do have a good degree of reliability. And there have been a number of big international studies that have applied this kind of measure and then attempted to tease out the components that seem to be contributing to well-being in populations. Okay, so let's switch just now to look at one or two slides, and I'm just going to look for there it is, and share my screen with you, and hopefully, can you, oops, no, we're nearly there, just hold on a moment. There, now, could somebody wave? Yes, good, thank you. So, you can still see me, is that right? Yep, you can still see me as well. Okay. Okay, so taking one of the largest studies here, if you compare differences in levels of subjective well-being between different countries, okay, these are the factors in this particular study, the World Values Study back in 2003. These are the factors that come out of the analysis, and you'll see that actually the proportion of the population that's divorced comes out, and unemployment. Divorce and unemployment are up there at the top of the list. In other words, the lower the proportion of the population that's unemployed and divorced, the better the overall well-being of that population. And then factors such as community belonging, quality of government, often very important, the degree of corruption in a country. And then do you see at the bottom there, it's not the biggest effect by any means or the most important, but the fraction of the population with an active belief in God. It's not the most important effect, as I said, but it is a beneficial effect. And that effect seems to be strongest for those with active religious commitment rather than those who kind of just wear their religious affiliation as a badge but never go to church. It's the people who actually are active in their faith, those studies found, which seem to have that belief in God benefit in terms of the well-being link there. Well, that's well-being, but what about the risk of actually having a mental disorder? Is there a link with faith there? Well, actually, there's been a huge amount of work, hundreds of studies looking at this particular question. This is what they find. So let's have a look at our next slide. This is a summary paper I'm referencing here, Bonelli and Koenig. Koenig's done a lot of work here, but there's a lot of data out there. And you can see here that having a Christian faith correlates negatively with being depressed, suicidal, or prone to addictions. Now, in other words, what I'm saying is that people of faith are less prone to depression and addiction, not more. There's also a negative relationship with anxiety and dementia, although it's smaller, much smaller, and no relationship at all with psychotic disorders. So the bottom line here is that faith is associated with lower levels of those particular mental illnesses: depression, substance misuse, alcohol misuse, anxiety disorder to a lesser degree, and dementia. It's not a strong effect. It's not the biggest effect overall, but it is a significant effect. It's a small to modest, it's a small to medium size effect, and it's there. Now, remember, folks, before anybody reminds me, correlation doesn't equal causation. I know that. It's quite possible that it isn't faith that produces well-being here, but rather people who already feel well are drawn to faith. You know, that's possible, isn't it? Or similarly, it may be that faith doesn't protect against depression, but people who get depressed avoid faith or avoid religion. Those things are possible. It's hard to say, but actually, we do know that many people come to faith at times of personal crisis. There is work on that. It's when people are going through tough times, a divorce, depression, a life crisis, that actually brings them into a church asking big questions about life and meaning of life. And of course, a lot of churches do a lot of work with people who have substance misuse and homelessness. A lot of churches go out looking for needy people and say, we're about you. And that would actually push these correlations the other way. And that makes this link even more remarkable, that overall people of faith on these bigger studies score lower on risk of being depressed or addicted. Something seems to be going on here. In fact, Muller et al. Carried out a huge academic review. They were looking at something like 350 studies on physical health and 850 studies on mental health, and they put them all together and reviewed them, and this was their conclusion. Okay, here it is. Most studies, they said, most studies have shown that religious involvement and spirituality are associated with better health outcomes, including greater longevity, coping skills, and health-related quality of life, even during terminal illness, and less anxiety, depression, and suicide. Several studies have shown that addressing the spiritual needs of the patient may enhance recovery from illness. Okay, so let's move on then to our second question. If there's a case here that actually faith is good for us, the question then is, well, what factors might mediate that positive relationship? You know, what's going on here? Well, overall, we know that if we look at human happiness, quite a lot of that, let's have a look at another slide here. Quite a lot of that is down to what are called set point factors. These are factors you can't do much about. You know, your genetics is a big part of that. And you know, if you're a half, you know, you tend to see the glass half full kind of person, you know, and if you've been like that all your life, it is tough to shift those kinds of set points that are often constitutional or part of our personality that have some kind of genetic base. But it's only 50%. It's not the whole story. Circumstances apply to another 10% of the factors that determine happiness, but 40% is determined by this thing called intentional activities. That is, these are people who do a lot of research on well-being and happiness. Intentional activities, they say, is doing certain things that seem to be associated with happiness. I think it's likely that religion exerts its beneficial effects here through these activities. So you're all asking, I hope, well, what kind of activities? Well, first, we know that faith promotes social networks and community. Love of one's neighbor, working out that loving community, is integral to the Christian understanding of what it means to flourish as a human being. And it's great to hear that you're actually meeting together in person already. And there's something about our humanity which makes us want to connect again. But I suggest that it is part and parcel of Christian formation, that we grow as Christians in community. And so we're encouraged to do that as Christians, and we become more human and more Christ-like in those relationships, especially those relationships that involve acts of self-giving. And self-giving, generosity, again, is linked with well-being. So it's not surprising that when psychologists attempt to tease apart what makes being part of religious seem to be important in determining well-being, that this is a major player. And the Christian faith points us to other habits of life, or rules for life, you might say, in a Jordan Peterson-esque kind of way, that lead to flourishing. The Christian emphasis on family life and family stability. Kids thrive in stable family relationships. They love the notion, the thought of two parents committed to one another, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, for a mum and dad that are going to be there tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. Kids thrive on that. They develop healthily and well in that setting. And of course, the Christian faith frames that calling as an important part of its message. And it's good for us. Acts of kindness. And there, lastly, on that little list, you'll see, I talk about decentering spiritual practices. Now, what do I mean by that? Decentering spiritual practices. Well, actually, decentering is just a fancy term, really, for our human ability to step outside of ourselves and to see ourselves as part of a bigger story, a bigger picture, a story that's bigger than me. It's about seeing ourselves as being meaningfully involved in a story that meaningfully involves me, but which isn't all about me. Now, you see, fear, hopelessness, resentment, these are centering psychological frames of mind. They draw us into ourselves. They make the story about me. We see the world, we evaluate through the lens of what's right for me, you see. And fear and hopelessness and resentment draw us in, they're centering psychological states. But there are other psychological habits and frames of mind which are decentering. Particularly, I've named just two of them there: gratitude. Another is awe. Now, I'd love to talk about awe. There's a whole evening's in itself, cultivating a sense of awe and the psychological benefits of that. But the one I want to talk about is the first one there, gratitude. I want to look at gratitude, and over again, right through the Bible, the Christian Bible, Christians, followers of Christ, are called to practice gratitude. And I think we'll leave our slides there, and I'll just return, if I might, to my script, and I will just put you a little bit down my computer there. Okay. So over and over again, as I say, right through the Bible, Christians are called to practice gratitude, to be grateful, to be people with a thankful heart. And of course, the question is, well, and we often read this as Christians, but we don't say, well, how do you do that? What does it actually mean intentionally to practice gratitude? Well, first, you have to look intentionally for good around you in your life. How many of us spend our time looking for what's bad? Of course, biological survival instincts prime us to look for threats. We're disposed to look for potential problems. We're on the lookout, and that leads us to tend to count our curses and let them mount up in resentment. I mean, how many of us, when the heating goes wrong, we remember that, but how many of us remember to notice when the heating goes right? Every day, my heating has clicked on for the past year. Every morning, it's there, and it's warm. And it takes effort, you see, to detect, to ponder our blessings, a wealth of good things that every day just fall into our lap. That's the first stage of cultivating a grateful heart. Are you doing that? I just want to, you don't have to be a Christian to do it, but those of us who are Christians, we have so many reasons for doing this. Now, for some, this work of seeing gifts of beauty and goodness around us, for some of us, this comes easier than others. Let's admit that. I mean, G.K. Chesterton, the author, the Christian author, it came easily to him, I've got to say. He said this, he said, "I like the cyclist style ink. It is so inky. The startling wetness of water excites and intoxicates me." He was a bit over the top, but there we are. "The fieriness of fire," he said, "the steeliness of steel, the unutterable muddiness of mud." But you see what's going on here. He is smelling the coffee of the good things, the world around him. Others of us, though, find it temperamentally harder. We've got to work harder to do this, to notice the good. Einstein, for example, he said, "I need to remind myself intentionally 100 times a day that my inner and outer life depend on the labors of other people. I must exert myself in order to give back the measure in gratitude that I have received." That was Einstein. Maybe you're like him. So the first step is intentionally to see. The second step is intentionally to count, to practice counting, noticing, stacking up your blessings. Psychologist Robert Emmons, he's done a lot of work on this, and he used a 3-way randomized trial to illustrate how counting our blessings, noticing, and then nurturing a sense of gratitude for what we've been given makes a difference. he asked one arm of that study to go through the day and then keep a gratitude diary and make a list of 25 things that day or something like that, a list of things that for which they needed to be grateful. I mean, if you think of the food on your table, just the chain of people, the delivery people, the people who pick those blueberries, the people who put them into packages, the people who transported them to your house, it falls onto your table. Notice that. And so he asked one arm to keep a gratitude diary. The next arm, he asked to keep a diary of things that had gone wrong or things that they disliked about that day. And it isn't hard to see at the end of 3 and then 6 months, a raft of psychological measures of those people in that study. It was the people who practiced gratitude who experienced those better mental health outcomes. So how about committing to this spiritual discipline? Start a gratitude diary. Note down every evening the good, the beautiful things that came your way into the lives of others due to the grace of God, if you're a believer, and thank God for it. And even as I sit here in my study, I think of the sun that poured in this morning, for the unutterable muddiness of mud I encountered on the heath this afternoon, for the amazing insulated wellies that kept my feet warm, for the delivery people that toil every day to drop things through my door, and on it goes. Let gratitude do its work of decentering and bringing life to our inner world. Now, of course, look, you don't have to have faith to be thankful, although it helps because it gives you a source. It gives you someone to whom to go with a grateful heart. But you don't have to have faith for that. You don't have to have faith to be a person of awe, noticing the awesomeness of the world. You don't have to have faith to be a pro-social person, a person who sets up scouts and cubs and helps in the community. Of course, lots of people do these things. But what I just want to suggest and remind us, these are the gifts of faith, as is meaning and purpose, and crucially in the life of the believer, the experience of being part of a story that is bigger than me. So what can we conclude? I want to finish with this thought. And especially, as I say, if you're just listening in and maybe you're an atheist or a skeptic, and I just want to say this, if there is a God, let's do a thought experiment with me. If there is a God, if there is a supreme being, wouldn't you want him to be the kind of God who encourages these kinds of activities, disciplines in his followers? Acts of kindness, community, self-giving, gratitude, a sense of being held and loved, as Jesus spoke of there, a sheep who knows his voice, being part of a bigger story, a story that is shot through with goodness and beauty and truth. I just want to say this. What if he is this kind of God? Wouldn't that be worth looking into some more? In fact, what if he's not only the kind of God who requires it of his followers, but one who models it in his own being. And what I mean here is that at the heart of the Christian faith is the story of God who became a man, to take into himself the brokenness, Christians call it the sin of the world, to draw it into himself, and then to call us and those who accept the forgiveness that brings to a different way, a way that leads, as we've seen, to what Jesus called fullness of life. It's not all delivered by any means in this life, but one that has an horizon which transcends death into eternity. And if there were a God like that, wouldn't you want him to be something like that? Well, it's been a privilege to share a little of this, a little of my own experience, and my own experience is that he is like that, and that's why I'm here, I guess. But I'm going to stop there. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to share, and it's back over to you, Johnny. I think it's Johnny. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Glenn, so much.